So, Twitter was banned in Brazil. Well, I shouldn't say banned, but rather Twitter was suspended in Brazil. Why, you may ask? Well, it boils down to Elon Musk refusing to comply with Brazilian law, in which social media companies must employ someone in Brazil to handle government takedown notices, as Brazil has strict federal laws against hate speech. And since Musk closed all of his Brazilian offices and fired everyone who worked there, Twitter can therefore no longer be used within Brazil. In Brazil, racism, homophobia, and transphobia are not protected by freedom of speech, and Twitter continually violates that federal law. In 2019, the Supreme Court of Brazil, or STF, ruled that homophobia is a non-bailable crime. In the decision, the Supreme Court understood that the racism law, which says you can go to jail for propagating racism, applied to cases of homophobia and transphobia. Article 20 of the law in question provides for a sentence of 1 to 3 years in prison and a fine for anyone who engages in this behavior. There is also the possibility of classifying a homophobic offense as an insult, according to Article 143 of the Criminal Code, explains the professor at FGV in Rio, Ligia Fabris. Though she adds, all the progress that can be seen in the last 10 years reaches very basic dimensions, and the statistics that record violence against the LGBTQIA+ community in Brazil are alarming. There's still a long way to go. So, to honor the law and protect their citizens, the government's only choice was to ban Twitter. And on top of all this, we're currently in an election year in Brazil, not for president, but for municipal officials, including mayoral elections, which are notoriously contentious here, and the threat of fake news is real. Local government elections, specifically city council seats and mayoral seats, are as big as presidential politics, and just as heated. So it makes sense why the government wants to stop the spread of misinformation. Lastly, Brazilian working law is very protective of workers and laborers. Companies need to guarantee 6 months of paid maternity leave. Pregnant individuals cannot be fired once they're pregnant, and for a year after returning from work. And the taxes companies pay per employee are also very high, among other laws. And I'm sure that's a big reason why Musk left Brazil. He doesn't want to comply with working law. What billionaire does? So, for a myriad of reasons, Twitter is suspended in Brazil until Musk chooses to bend to Brazilian law, which I'm sure he won't. You can still access Twitter with a VPN, but the fine for doing so is 50,000 Brazilian reais. And as I live in Brazil, you won't see me on Twitter until it's resolved, which won't be anytime soon. Hashtag come to blue sky. So in this video, I thought I'd discuss my own feelings about the ban and being off Twitter, why I think it's a good thing to finally be rid of it, but also why I and many others find ourselves missing it, and how it has to do with a thing you may or may not have heard of called pseudo-events and the graphic revolution. I'll also be talking about the social media paradox, which is that you'd think having a platform with no algorithm would be better because most of us know how learning algorithms keep us in bubbles and make us addicted to social media, but in reality, not having an algorithm or something that curates your feed, ironically and paradoxically, makes you like a site less and eventually makes sites that don't have learning algorithms fail or feel empty, at least for me so far. Isn't it awful how our brains have been wired to prefer something more addicting and less useful than something free from addictiveness and totally new? Lastly, we'll be discussing what we can do about social media's numerous downsides while still not losing something that's very valuable to millions of people. So without further ado, let's go. So after being off Twitter the past week or so, I honestly find myself to be pretty happy, and I miss it a little less each day. I don't think I would have ever left if it hadn't been forced upon me, and now that it has, I don't find myself endlessly scrolling anymore just to refresh that slot machine and see what news awaits me. And to be frank, I was really hooked on it. It was my main social media platform, and I went on Twitter like most of you every morning and was checking that thing like my daily newspaper, scrolling through funny memes and jokes and also the most horrifying images and videos you could imagine at 6 a.m. What a lovely way to start the day. It got so bad sometimes that putting my phone down before I went to sleep was like ripping a face hugger off of my face, and the worst part of it was that I knew it was bad for me, but I just couldn't get off of it. So in a way, for me personally, the ban was a net positive, though I found a substitute, Blue Sky, but we'll get to that in the next section. For this part, I want to talk about why I agree with the ruling, but also its nuances. Firstly, I support the Supreme Court decision not only because it was beneficial to me personally, as I talked about, though that does make me biased, but also it just makes sense because no billionaire is above the law. Like the government said, it's the responsibility of the company and its owner to protect its users from hate speech and fake and misleading news. And when they can't do that, it's time for the government to step in. Someone has to. And though I do agree that taking down Twitter in Brazil was the right thing to do and a huge first step when regulating regulating what can be done and said online, I do think that simply having a representative of the social media company in question in countries where they operate is not enough to stop fake news and hate speech. I mean, Facebook is in Brazil and all over the world and is rampant with AI bullshit, fake news, hate, and graphic content, and it's still in operation. Simply following the law doesn't mean that social media will be free of bullshit. Simultaneously, I do think that trying to regulate Facebook is a giant task that not any one government can combat alone. Things will slip through the cracks, they always will, and it's up to the company itself to input better parameters on what goes up and what comes down. In April of 2024, the president of Google Brazil, Fabio Coelho, said that homophobia and racism don't count as free speech, which is great and true, but he also said this at a summit where they're talking about how we can use AI for good. He took part in the Harnessing AI for a Better Future panel in Rio, and at the event he explained how Google deals with fake news. According to Global, Fabio said, all companies must be responsible for dealing with misinformation issues. He stated that Google tries to value quality content and quickly remove low-quality content with the help of algorithms, letting the machines work their magic. So much for don't be evil. But in reality, I just think the internet has become too big and too monstrous to be regulated by real people. So I get the use of an algorithm, not to mention that content moderation is an extremely taxing job that can emotionally ruin you. Content moderators for Facebook that were outsourced in South Africa cited mental health trauma from not only their low-paying non-union jobs, but also from being forced to moderate obscene content for hours on end. In October of 2023, Motong, a South African, filed a lawsuit against Facebook's parent company Meta and its local outsourcing firm Sama, alleging irregular pay, union busting, and inadequate mental health support resulting in trauma. So I guess we need to let algorithms do the job, which I guess is fine. At least AI is being used for something beneficial rather than stealing people's work. But then you have to also take into account who's programming the AI, who's telling it what's appropriate and what's real and what's not. And that's not even to mention how AI and algorithms are biased in their own right. So how do we go about policing social media to protect vulnerable users from spreading misinformation or being radicalized by algorithms or violating freedom of speech? Is that even possible? Let me know what you think down below. But for me, I'm just uneasy about how quickly AI and algorithms have taken over our lives in such a short amount of time. Like, let's just regulate search results and social networks with the algorithm. It'll know what to do. Like, Apple is releasing an iPhone with AI, something that was built to steal our data, scan our photos and art, and we're just okay with it? We're just okay with Apple scanning our faces and fingerprints and collecting our pictures and accessing our cameras just for the sake of looking cool by having the latest product? I guess Dave Eggers was right. Sorry, man, we are living in the circle. And now even Instagram and Google have installed AI search engines. Art we save to Adobe is being fed into an AI machine. Kids are using ChatGPT to do homework, and even one of my videos has been used to train AI. Yay. Like, have any of you seen The Matrix? So in the end, Brazil did the right thing. Twitter right now is unfixable and the owner isn't willing to take accountability, so throw it all away. Get rid of it because it clearly cannot be regulated, and the billionaire who wanted it so badly doesn't care about protecting its users from hate groups, but rather wants to promote the biggest bigots on the platform. And at the end of the day, though I miss scrolling as well as the friends I made along the way, I'm on board with what the government's doing. Like I just explained, social media is a monster, and controlling it with algorithms or with humans is a Herculean task that no social networking corporation wants to undertake because it would mean lack of ad revenue and engagement that's used to sell to advertisers, by the way, and also just be really freaking hard. So governments need to come in and fight for their citizens. Properly controlling social media would take innovation and resources that the people getting rich off of our clicks don't give a shit about. Instagram, keep pushing Shein and shitty Amazon products. Who cares if they'll just end up in a landfill? Twitter, keep feeding people rage bait and posting pro-Trump ads. Even I was getting those for some reason. And Facebook, keep spreading AI images to see who's most susceptible to being scammed. And what's worse, these social media apps keep us in these loops of buying, distracting us with nonsense like conspiracy theories, and again, fake AI generated images, and bread and circus like celebrity gossip, and lastly triggering us with either dopamine via engagement, likes and views, or fear via doom scrolling. And in the end, they're harvesting our data and using up our time and energy, much like in The Matrix. I guess we're already there. I'm on Blue Sky where things move a bit slower, there's no algorithm and no ads, but that also means less engagement for users, and it's harder to really find an audience or find people to follow. I know that there's lists and that you can choose accounts to follow and everything's in order by when it's posted rather than again with an algorithm, but I still haven't really found my people, I guess. It's growing, especially since there's a lot of Brazilians. Like in the days following the suspension of Twitter, there were over 2 million users on Blue Sky. So I know leaving Twitter was for the best, and it's great that there's a new competitor. It'll just take some time for me to get used to, which I know makes it sound like I'm a social media addict going through withdrawal. I mean, we're called users, but that scroll really does something to your brain. So now I can't endlessly scroll all day. And honestly, I do feel good about it. But part of me would be lying if I said I didn't genuinely miss Twitter, and I know a lot of you do too, so let's talk about it. What are the positives of social media? We spent a lot of the first part discussing the cons, mainly that it's impossible to regulate in its current state, but I want to get into the pros because they explain why I miss Twitter. Firstly, community building. Social media helps those who may be disabled or can't leave the house as much to meet up, and the online social networking space creates a virtual meeting spot for them and others, and helps all people stay connected with loved ones around the world. It helps people who are marginalized find others with similar identities and feelings. Not to mention, just generally for all people, sharing art and thoughts and feelings and things that make you laugh with others is a fun thing to do, and with Twitter we got to do that in real time. I mean, the Brazilian Miku trend led to such good and fun art, as well as important discourse, and I know it'll happen on Blue Sky eventually too, but I don't know, this is just an example of how Twitter could still have its moments, and how it's hyperbolic to say that all social media is bad and horrible and we should just get rid of it as a concept altogether. Secondly, it was a huge source of bringing protesters together and organizing social movements. For example, Twitter's role in the Arab Spring and the 2020 BLM movement, and how collective anger at times can be used for good. Additionally, Twitter and social media as a whole helps to spread news at a faster rate in real time. It helps to know when injustices are happening so we can do something about them. Violence can't be done behind closed doors anymore. Though I will say knowing about obscene acts of violence doesn't stop them from happening or stop those in power from committing them. And that's the sad and honest truth that made me feel worn out with Twitter. There comes those cons rearing their ugly heads again. Like every day I was seeing all this horrible, gruesome stuff and no one was doing anything about it. Well, at least no one who had the power to stop it. But the bright side is that Twitter helped mainstream important and less talked about topics, at least in the US, like the genocide in Gaza, the Sudan, and the Congo. It especially helped many of those, for example in the US, who might have been ignorant, like me, to the fact that millions are suffering because of the country I lived in. When you don't have access to a wide variety of unbiased information, you're not able to unlearn dangerous ideologies and have your worldview challenged. Now, with social media, we know the truth. In some ways, it feels empowering. Power is knowledge, and through knowledge we can act. But at times when you can't turn it off, or when bad news is made to be addicting, it can be draining and have the opposite effect and make you depressed. Like we have the knowledge, but no power, at least not in the immediate moment when we see the atrocity, and feeling like that every time you go online isn't healthy. It makes you wonder, maybe humans weren't meant to carry all of this in their pocket everywhere all at once, especially on a social media site where you're supposed to chill and hang out with friends and share art and send funny memes, but then also be exposed to every awful thing going on right now that you're powerless to stop. There needs to be a better balance between news sites and activist sites where people can call people to action and gather to help others, and social media sites to have fun on. But with the way websites and apps are made nowadays, that's almost impossible. Co-Host, a social media platform with no ads and algorithm and AI, closed their doors because it was weighing on them financially to keep running. That's the internet we're on now, where only big billionaires who sell their users' data and use AI win out. But despite all of this, I honestly find myself missing Twitter a lot because though it took a huge toll on my mental health, it was also my main social media platform where I wouldn't you know it, socialized with other people. I had long-time mutuals who I grew close with and supported and loved reading their random thoughts throughout the day. It was a place where I got to know people, and with Blue Sky so far I'm getting very minimal engagement, and because there's no algorithm, I'm not seeing anything I'm really interested in, which I guess is good because it makes it a lot less addictive, but I'm also less inclined to use it because of that. It just feels kind of dead right now, even though I did define my interest when making my profile and added little community tabs or lists like art and news. In the end, I'm still not really seeing anything worthwhile or engaging though. One reason I liked Twitter was because I felt like I was in this big live chat community, and I also felt like I was up to date with what's going on in the world. I got my daily dose of news from there. Now I feel like I'm disconnected from the rest of the world, but why do I feel like this when I'm less online than ever? Well, to answer that question, we need to talk about pseudo-events and Daniel J. Borstein's 1962 book, The Image, A Guide to Pseudo-Events in America. In the book, Borstein talks about the 1960s graphic revolution in which we became an audiovisual society rather than a text-based society. And this goes beyond advertisers and commercials trying to sell us a product in print or on TV, but affects our current political events, our politics, how we travel, how we view and create celebrities, and how we want others to view ourselves. Basically, for Borstein, ever since the 1960s, we lived in a world of pseudo-events, synthetic experiences and people and images that have created an illusion that there's something important, when in reality they're just distractions and us trying to live up to some sort of imagined standard of how we think the world should be. He writes, "In our popularity game, we ask the world not, 'Do you like me?' but 'Do you like my shadow?'" Basically, if Borstein was alive today, he'd be complaining about Instagram and how we don't travel for experiences, but to create experiences, and then take photos of them to show off to our friends. Borstein writes of commercial travel in 1962, "The experience has become diluted, contrived, and prefabricated." The most relevant part of his book to explain why I miss Twitter is when in the first chapter he discusses pseudo-news events, as well as our illusion that we can effectively change the world. He writes, "We are ruled by extravagant expectations. The first being of what the world holds, of how much news there is, of how many heroes there are, how often masterpieces are made, how exotic the nearby can be, how familiar the exotic can become, of the closeness of places and the forces of places. And the second being, we are eluded by expectations of how much power we have to shape the world, of our ability to create events when there are none, to make heroes when they don't exist, to be somewhere else when we haven't left home, of our ability to make art forms suit our convenience, to transform a novel into a movie and vice versa, to turn a symphony into mood conditioning, to fabricate national purposes when we lack them, to pursue these purposes after we have fabricated them, to invent our standards and then to respect them as if they had been revealed or discovered." And because of these grand expectations of our own lives, we create pseudo-events, manufactured events that only exist to fill the 24-hour insatiable news cycle, to sell ads, to sell papers back in the 1960s when this was written, and to make our lives feel more important than they are, to give us the illusion of control and that we're doing something worthwhile. The example of a pseudo-event he gives is one of a hotel. The owners of a hotel in 1923 consult a public relations council. They ask how to increase their hotel's prestige and so improve their business. In less sophisticated times, the answer might have been to hire a new chef, to improve the plumbing, to paint the rooms, or to install a crystal chandelier in the lobby. The Public Relations Council technique is more indirect. He proposes that the management stage a celebration of the hotel's 30th anniversary. A committee is formed including a prominent banker, a leading society matron, a well-known lawyer, an influential preacher, and an event is planned, say a banquet, to call attention to the distinguished service the hotel has been rendering to the community. The celebration is held, photographs are taken, the occasion is widely reported, and the object is accomplished. Now this occasion is a pseudo-event and will illustrate all the essential features of pseudo-events. This celebration we can see at the outset is somewhat but not entirely misleading. Presumably the Public Relations Council would not have been able to form this committee of prominent citizens if the hotel had not actually been rendering a service to the community. On the other hand, if the hotel's services had been all that important, instigation by Public Relations Council might not have been necessary. Once the celebration is held, the celebration itself becomes evidence that the hotel is a really distinguished institution. The occasion actually gives the hotel prestige to which it is pretending. A pseudo-event, then, is a happening that possesses the following characteristics. Number 1, it's not spontaneous but comes about because someone has planned it, planted it, or incited it. Typically, it's not a train wreck or an earthquake, but an interview or press conference or even an award show that exists to make a big spectacle out of something that can then produce other pseudo-events to make more money. Opinion pieces, interviews, commentary, and behind-the-scenes content to fill the news cycle. As news is always happening after all. Well, it has to if we're going to move stock and get eyeballs on our stuff. As Borstein writes, the news behind the news has become the most appealing news of the world. Number 2, it is planted primarily for the immediate purpose of being reported or reproduced. Therefore, its occurrence is arranged for the convenience of the reporting and reproduction of media. The question, is it real, is less important than, is it newsworthy? Number 3, its relation to the underlying reality of the situation is ambiguous. Its interests arise largely from its very ambiguity. Concerning a pseudo-event, the question becomes, what does it mean? And this question has a new dimension. While the news interest in a train wreck is what happened and in the real consequences, the interest in an interview is always, in a sense, in whether it really happened and in what might have been the motives. Did the statement really mean what it said? Without some of this ambiguity, a pseudo-event cannot be very interesting. And Twitter is full of these pseudo-events that we all love so much, as we've all grown up in an audiovisual society post-graphic revolution and post-information age. Twitter, though, is a place to receive news links and read headlines about actual events that have real consequences. In reality, it's more of a place where we read other people's comments on news. We read each other's opinions, and Twitter thrives off of ambiguity. If there's something ambiguous that we can tear apart, look into, and investigate and make posts about, we will. And then viral takes about pseudo-events spread and become the next newsworthy thing to grace our timelines. It's not so much about what is happening in the news that had me hooked and scrolling, but what others were saying about the news. These mini pseudo-events and comments about the world were my news, not the actual articles people were linking, but that's again why the app held my attention. As Borstein writes, we as audience members love pseudo-events because they make us feel important and in control, even though we have very little. It also makes us feel significant, more significant than we might be, and that's how life should feel all the time, right? Big and significant. Additionally, Twitter doesn't just promote the multiplication of pseudo-events by letting viral moments and reactions to news become news events, but it gives us this 24-hour feedback loop of news. And because it's nonstop, news corporations have to work around the clock to produce pseudo-events that millions of users can all react to in real time, creating even more pseudo-events. And it all feeds into this never-ending cycle. As Borstein writes, an innocent observer might have expected that the rise of television and on-the-spot telecasting of news around the world would produce a pressure to report authentic, spontaneous events exactly as they occur. But ironically, these, like earlier improvements in the techniques of precise representation, have simply created more and better pseudo-events. Lastly, Twitter and social media as a whole lets us shape our own timeline and newsfeed, our own way to view the world, and thus lets us feel as though we're in control, when in reality it's an algorithm that's shaping what we're seeing. At the same time, Twitter also helps us cultivate our own synthetic image of ourselves that we'd like to show the world. Again, giving into our grandiose nature. Images have become more powerful to Borstein than the real thing. One example he gives is an anecdotal conversation. Admiring friend. My, that's a beautiful baby you have there. Mother. Oh, that's nothing. You should see this photograph. But it wasn't always like this. As the author writes, when the first American newspaper, Benjamin Harris's Public Occurrences, both foreign and domestic, appeared in Boston on September 25th, 1690, it promised to furnish news regularly once a month. But the editor explained it might appear oftener if any gut of occurrences happened. The responsibility of making news was entirely God's or the devil's. The newsman's task was only to give an account of such considerable things as have arrived under our notice. Our current point of view is better expressed in the definition by Arthur McEwen, whom William Randolph Hearst made his first editor of the San Francisco Examiner. News is anything that makes a reader say, gee whiz, or put more soberly, news is whatever a good editor chooses to print. We used to believe there were only so many events in the world. If there were not many intriguing or startling occurrences, it was no fault of the reporter. He could not be expected to report what did not exist. Within the last 100 years, however, and especially within the 20th century, all of this has changed. We expect the papers to be full of news. We expect our timelines to be full of pressing news. We expect our timelines to be filled with pressing issues to be outraged by, to comment on, and to become the next viral moment, and thus turning someone's 100-character comment into a pseudo-news piece. And I think because I grew up in this environment where pseudo-events were so normalized, even on the internet, where algorithms feed us important information all the time, now Now that I'm on Blue Sky and that's not there, it's a big shock, but honestly, a welcome one. Albeit, I do still find myself refreshing again and again to find something interesting before I just close out. And though I highly recommend Borstein's book, I don't wholly agree that we can't change the world or have control over our circumstances, but I get the sentiment. We all want to be the main character and want our lives to be as big as we see in movies and read in books. We all want to have narrative cohesion in our stories, in our life stories, to make sense of ourselves and the world, but that just doesn't exist in the real world or in our real lives, especially when it comes to politics and news of the day. Life doesn't exist to entertain, but that's how life is reported, because under capitalism, that's the only way to make it profitable. And thus, we try to force this narrative that big things are constantly happening, delay important information to save it for the next news cycle, create fake events to fill the news cycle to fit your publisher's political biases, and in the end, it all just becomes noise that you have to sift through to find any semblance of truth. This is anecdotal, but I remember when there was a fire in Notre Dame a few years ago, and everyone was talking about it and how they went there and how sentimental it was to them and how it affected them so deeply, which fine, that makes sense. But when you post about it online, it does come across as shallow, and again, trying to make the event about you, to put yourself in the spotlight and broadcast yourself on social media. And on social media, it feels like any big event turns into a pseudo-event multiplier and just exists to keep the timeline fresh and refreshed and to keep engagement and advertisement revenue high. The comments and posts about Notre Dame help to up its prestige, not the fire itself, and help to start conversations about historic preservation, which are important, and it's fine to share your feelings on social media about something, but it was also, again, the perfect pseudo-event in that it spawned even more news and posts, and those posts about the event started making headlines and becoming more important than the fire itself. That's not to say Notre Dame isn't important in its own right, but because we've been conditioned to only engage with news and how it might affect us, it helps to enforce main character syndrome, and people are more eager to just comment on their own memories and lives relating to the cathedral rather than to digest the news and reflect on it and move on from something that doesn't actually affect their lives. It's hard not to be cynical when viewing news and social media and how news operates on sites like Twitter and Facebook. On those sites and on news apps and the news sites themselves, they thrive off of news as entertainment, and they're more likely to push something that has entertainment value, and how much value a news piece has depends on how much it can be reproduced, not the events themselves. The cathedral's only value on the internet is how it relates to other people and their own stories and its ability to reproduce news, and that kind of dilutes the importance of a big event like this. At least that's how I see it. Let me know what you think down below. Sometimes the most pressing news is what's happening in your own town or city, but that won't make international headlines and thus won't keep viewers engaged because it's not something that's extremely high with global stakes. Even though ironically a local water break or power outage will have immediate negative consequences to you. But this sort of news won't be something you'll hear about on a big news station, but just maybe in a town email or bulletin, and thus this pressing immediate issue isn't newsworthy simply because it won't sell and won't create more pseudo-events to report on and make money from. The further we go in history, the less news has to do with our own communities and municipalities, but more about global events or celebrity events that might not actually impact our daily lives. On the flip side, however, as the world becomes more globalized, especially post-World War II and post-1962, events on the other side of the world do impact us, and we do have a hand in them. Us buying cheap goods from Shein impacts workers in China, which then impacts the shipping workers on container ships, which then impacts the warehouse workers, delivery people, and so forth. So when you hear a news story about Shein factories abusing workers, that should at least make an imprint on your conscience. There's nuance to everything. Though Borstein's book is extremely insightful and even prophetic in today's day and age, we also should be mindful that even though global news may not have an immediate impact on your daily life right now, that doesn't mean you're not impacting someone else's life, or that you can't change your habits to help someone on the other side of the world. And I just want to say here that this isn't to say that fashion or pop culture news or even like celebrity news isn't important or entertaining, but its quantity and pervasiveness that pushes other real consequential events to the back burner is alarming and at least should be questioned, especially on platforms like social media and Twitter that thrive on a news's ambiguity and people weighing in on it, whether they have something important to say or not. And there's such an incentive to keep the discourse going because of likes and clicks and advertising money and money to be made by just prolonging things. And sometimes people say stuff without much substance just to say it to try to get, again, attention in this attention economy. And that should, I think, be commented on, ironically. And I'm guilty of it. I have a commentary channel where I comment on news and gossip and entertainment, and that's not inherently bad. I think that we should all be able to comment and talk about the day's events, whether it be about pop culture or hard-hitting news. But on Twitter, a platform that champions ignorance and doesn't leave room for nuance and thrives off constant engagement, isn't conducive to good commentary. And neither are large news corporations, for that matter, that have their own political biases and agendas and have become entertainment channels rather than reporting news. In addition, with pseudo-events like bigoted, racist, and transphobic commentary becoming headline news due to the poster's popularity and engagement on social media, it makes sense for governments to want to curb bigotry on social media platforms because hate shouldn't be given a platform and shouldn't be allowed to blow up and be turned into news by legitimate journalistic institutions. With social media becoming a pseudo-event generator, it makes news publications feel the need to report someone's hateful line and quip and turn it into a news event, a pseudo-news event, when it's not newsworthy in the slightest. Some of the most popular pseudo-event reproducers are true crime and biopic pieces because they thrive on being open-ended, because we'll never know a person's true intentions, whether they be a killer or a famous person or a scammer. For example, Anna Delvey's ambiguity turned into this news cycle in and of itself, and true crime in general turns into their own pseudo events for the viewers watching, because we all want to know what are the motives, and we'll never know. Again, that's why they're so popular. You can just talk and talk and talk and discuss and theorize ad nauseum and make money. Currently, I'm getting the news from the sites themselves, and it has become a solitary event. I read it and digest it, but without a comment section, without reading other people's takes, and it's quiet. In some ways, I think that's better than feeding into a collective outrage machine and continuing the cycle of creating more pseudo-events. But other times, I miss what people have to say. I like hearing people's news commentary and thoughts, as well as sharing my own opinion with a group. I don't think that it's inherently a bad thing, and I don't think Bornstein thinks that either. What is alarming is when news is made up in such a way to just create more of it to sell money, rather than just reporting on issues at hand as they happen. But simply commentating on the news of the day and reading other people's opinions does have merit. What we say matters. Maybe it shouldn't be newsworthy, like someone's tweets about news isn't news, but it doesn't mean someone's voice should be ignored, especially voices who come from marginalized groups who don't have mainstream news outlets backing or reporting their causes. It feels like with every pro of Twitter, there's a con. A huge pro is being able to upload and watch live news happening. The downside is that people are now being constantly filmed for likes and views and uploaded without their consent to a platform of millions of people. Not to mention how Twitter is basically a platform to create infinite miniature pseudo-events by making anyone's comment into a newsworthy take to fill the insatiable news cycle. Another pro is that you can build and find community. A con is that neo-Nazis and racists and transphobes can build and find community too. A pro is posting art, but then you're going to have your art fed into an AI machine without your consent, or even with your consent now that it's part of the terms and conditions. There will always be horrible things online, whether it be in shadowy forums or on mainstream social networking conglomerates, but it's up to the governments to pressure these companies to protect the data of their people and shield them from harmful, hateful, bigoted rhetoric that affects their online and offline lives. And Brazil took that appropriate measure. If you're not going to take responsibility as a company to do those things, you cannot and should not be able to operate within the borders of that country. Social media like Twitter is fun and engaging when it's not addictive and trying to push you to the alt-right. And in order to make Twitter better, hate speech needs to be curbed, and there needs to be real measures put in place by the corporation. But honestly, at this point in time, that seems unlikely. Not just for Twitter, but for Facebook, that's still operating in Brazil and still operates Instagram and WhatsApp. We need to bully Mark Zuckerberg more. I don't know if we'll ever be able to really fix these big tech monopolies, and if we can, we should just leave them and start finding other options. We, the users, do have the power to make a better internet away from these guys, and we can also pressure our government officials to enforce laws to shut them down if they don't serve the people who they're harvesting information from. As for Twitter, I do miss it for the fact that I'm no longer part of those mini pseudo-events. I'm not part of the collective outrage or collective enjoyment. I hate to admit it, but I liked watching tweets become newsworthy and viral and dissecting stuff like that and seeing other people's reactions. And I don't think, again, that's inherently wrong. And I don't think that it's inherently wrong to have a platform where comments become news because it's engaging and that is connection. But at the same time, do these little quips deserve to become real news and become big news? No. And I think both can be true, and that maybe we should have multiple platforms for different things like I mentioned previously. So that's it for this one. Let me know what you thought of this video down below and what you think about Blue Sky and Twitter. And I really hope Blue Sky doesn't become like Twitter and doesn't turn into like this machine of pseudo-events, this pseudo-event creator. But at the same time, it's kind of sad that the only social media platform that I actually like does have algorithms and does feed into this like outrage. I guess my brain has just been wired to prefer that. And that's kind of scary. Anyway, let me know if you miss Twitter as well, or if you don't, or if you decide to leave social media altogether, or why you see merit in it and how we can reform it. Thanks for watching. Do all the YouTube stuff, like, comment, subscribe. Thank you so much again for watching, and I'll see you in the next one. Bye.